And good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. I appreciate you being with me. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterism Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I'm thumbing through Mr. Hodges' book to try to find the place where I want to begin here. Anyway, on Fridays here on Morning Musings, I spend my time, and for those of you who might ask, I tore a muscle in my arm loading up some old motorcycles onto a guy's trailer. And anyway, really, really painful and very difficult for me to use a mouse. The doctor told me to wear this silly thing, but when I'm typing and using my mouse, it goes to spasming in my wrist area, and it just nearly takes me down. I've never had anything quite like this. But anywho, that's the way things happen. So let me remind you before we get into the video this morning. Tomorrow, October 26th, 2024, I will be debating Dr. Richard Carrier, who is a quite famous atheist, and he believes that Jesus lied, or at the very best, he failed, because he predicted, supposedly, that he was going to come back to put an end to human history, destroy heaven and earth in the first century. Well, obviously, Jesus did not come back to put an end to time and to destroy the material cosmos in the first century. Therefore, says Dr. Carrier, Jesus is not the Son of God, and the Bible most assuredly is not the inspired Word of God. I will be denying all of that, obviously. And so you can go to my website, donkpreston.com. On the very front page, you can click on it. There's a banner there with a link. All you have to do is click it tomorrow. And I just realized I didn't put the specific times for the beginning of the debate. I'll do that today, Friday. And so all you have to do is just go there at the time. It'll take you right straight to the website. Now, the website is MythVision, MythVision, okay, mythvision.com, hosted by Derek Lambert. He's a friend of mine. Unfortunately, he is now an atheist as well. But Derek's a real nice guy, very amiable, and he is sponsoring the debate on his channel. And of course, if you can't see it live, it will be archived. You'll be able to watch it at any time. So, with that said, don't forget, and by the way, do not forget the two book special for the month of October 2024, U.S. orders only. Resurrection Feast Fulfilled, a study of Sukkot, and Volume 1 of Torah to Telos, the end of the law. If you purchase those separately, they cost you over $50. But for this month, U.S. orders only, total delivered price $39.50. Okay, enough of that. I want to get back into our review and response to the book entitled Problems with Preterism by Mr. Brian Hodge. Now, I've shared with you over the last couple of weeks how Mr. Hodge believes that one of the fallacies of the full preterist view is because we take the book of Daniel as predictive of the coming of Jesus and the Messiah. And he says, oh, that's just wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because, and he focuses on Daniel chapter 9. Daniel 9 is all about the period of Antiochus Epiphanes in the 2nd century BC, 3rd century BC, and has nothing to do with the coming of Jesus. Well, I've shared with you several thoughts on that. One of the things that's really interesting to me, by the way, is one poster in response to my video said, well, this video has simply confirmed my view that Daniel was fulfilled in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. And I was, have to admit, I was a bit perplexed by that. How did anything that I say confirm what Mr. Hodge is saying? So I posted and I said, okay, please explain to me how everlasting righteousness was established in the time and in the events of Antiochus Epiphanes, and he wrote back, well, it wasn't. Okay, so what I said supposedly confirmed the Antiochian view. However, nothing that Daniel foretold was fulfilled in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Sorry, I don't see the logic there, and you probably don't either. So, I want to shift gears today and notice another aspect of Mr. Hodge's argumentation. And I have to tell you that I find this more than a little remarkable. So he shifts from claiming that Daniel 9 was fulfilled in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, and now he wants to argue about I'll just read the heading, the Book of Enoch and its influence on the apocalyptic speech upon Second Temple Judaism and the New Testament. Well, he argues that, and by the way, R.H. Charles, in his translation of the Book of Enoch, says no other apocryphal book has such a profound impact on the New Testament as does the Book of Enoch. So, Mr. Hodge says, Stephen L. Bridge comments below on how, quote, Luke's depiction of the end of time, notice that phraseology, consistently betrays the influence of the previously discussed sources, that is, the Testament of Moses, the Testament of Judah, 1st Enoch, and especially 1st Enoch. 2nd Peter uses the concept of the imprisoned watchers in chapter 2, verse 4 and 5, as well as the Enochian comparison between the flood in the past with the future melting of the world in fire, chapter 3, 6 to 7, and verses 10 to 13. Jude likewise not only uses the imprisoned angel concept, but mentions the book specifically in the prophecy that the Lord would come with many of his holy ones. Now, what Mr. Hodge proceeds to do is because Mr. Hodge says Enoch focuses on the flood as a near event. Well, in fact, let me just read what he says here, top of page 26. The reasons why this is of note, that is Enoch's use in the New Testament, is because the book of Enoch stages two events in a singular event, the flood and the end of the world. The figure of Enoch is predicting the flood in the book. However, it becomes very clear that the author is presenting Enoch as not only predicting the end of his world in the flood, but the end of the world, period. And then he makes this comment. The event this book describes is situated in the past flood event. The microcosmic event of the flood is not the final macrocosmic event at the end of the world, but these two events, now watch this, pay very careful attention. These two events are intertwined in the text as one singular event, so that the author continually moves in and out of both events in his description. So do you see what Mr. Hodge is doing? He says, well, in the first place, the book of Enoch talks about the flood. And of course, you understand that Enoch, and I hope you understand this, was written probably during the 2nd century BC. Many scholars believe that it was written before the period of the Maccabees, and that would be from 164 or 171 and following. So many believe that it was written prior to the time of the Maccabees. And it's believed that whoever wrote it, we don't know who wrote it, was using the name of Enoch fallaciously, falsely, but to give his book credibility. Now, folks, that takes a different mindset than what we have today. Well, our mindset today is, if you, let's say, if you're named John, and you decide to write a book, let's say a Western, and you put Louis L'Amour's name on it. Louis L'Amour was my most famous Western author of all time. But you decide to write a book under the name of Louis L'Amour when you're not Louis L'Amour, well, guess what? You're a fraud. Just like if you use someone else's material extensively, you don't give them accreditation for it, and you try to present it as your own material, well, that's called plagiarism, and it's simply wrong. There's no excuse for it. It's dishonesty. So, yet we are told that Enoch didn't really write the book, but he claimed that Enoch did write the book. And his audience was supposed to accept it as authoritative and the be all, do all, know all, blah, blah, blah. So it took a different mindset. Now, even Bart Ehrman, ladies and gentlemen, renowned skeptic, agnostic / atheist, says that, yes, this was done in the ancient world, and we do know it was done. However, Bart Ehrman acknowledges that when this was done, it was frowned upon. It was condemned. It was not something that, by and large, people go, oh, well, oh yeah, I know Enoch didn't write it, but hey, it's okay that somebody lied and said Enoch wrote it. No, that's not the way they did things. Now, in spite of that, it has to be admitted, all right, you have a balance of things here. In spite of the fact that, by and large, pseudonymity was condemned. At the same time, the book of Enoch, even though people recognized it was not written by Enoch, the book of Enoch did have a profound impact on the ancient world. Now, how do I explain that? In light of the fact that, yes, indeed, it was condemned, pseudonymity was condemned, and yet Enoch was accepted and respected. I don't have a firm answer for that. Quite freely admit I don't have an answer for that. Now, is it true that the New Testament writers draw on Enoch? Yes, Jude 14. Jude says that Enoch said, behold, he comes with 10,000 of his saints against the ungodly. And it's assumed that he's quoting from the book of Enoch itself. Well, probably was. I don't question that. I don't challenge that. Here is what I think better explains it. I believe that there was an oral prophecy given by the legitimate Enoch of Genesis chapter 5. That oral prophecy, inspired by the Holy Spirit, was transmitted down through the ages orally. Now, folks, you and I are not familiar enough with the fact of how powerful memorization was in the ancient world. You and I have trouble memorizing anything. The ancients memorized vast amounts of literature, vast amounts of oral tradition. Matter of fact, there were some rabbis, not many perhaps, but there were some rabbis who actually condemned writing things down because they were supposed to be memorized. The oral traditions were to be memorized. Now that's remarkable. But I got to hurry here. So, Mr. Hodges' main point is this. Okay, here you have Enoch predicting the near event, the flood, and intertwined with that prediction is his prediction of the ultimate consummation, i.e., the end of the world. Now, the question might be asked, Did this book of Enoch actually predict the quote end of the material world? Probably did. Probably did. But here's the question. Did the New Testament writers agree with Enoch about a coming dissolution of material creation? And to that, I would say, no, they did not. But what I want to note is something that many commentators have noticed this in the book of Enoch. In the introduction, R.H. Charles, who did the translation, takes note of the fact. Let me see if I can read this for you. Enoch says, okay, I understood as I saw the vision that he is relating, that it was not for this generation. Now the flood was, okay, but for a remote one, which is for to come. So Enoch is quite clear that he had a near fulfillment, i.e., the flood, and a far fulfillment. Now, that brings up a serious question, does it not? If anyone, we're constantly told God can't tell time. Now, mind you, I don't believe the book of Enoch is inspired of God. Influential? Yes. Respected? Yes. Used? Yes. Inspired? I don't believe so. But the point of it is, he made the claim that it was inspired, that the revelation was from God. Well, that means that God was using near language and far language objectively. So we ought to consider that as we look at the book of Enoch. Now, one of the very first things that I want to get to, and I'm having to flip through. I didn't have enough. I didn't have enough markers this morning. I had them in use in my other books, and I'm going to save this particular point until last. So let me make another point. One of the major themes in the book of Enoch, and by the way, this is devastating to Mr. Hodges' entire claim. Now remember, Mr. Hodge is saying that Enoch is talking about a near event, a far off event. Well, Enoch was. The near event was the flood, the far off was the consummation. The eschatological consummation, which Mr. Hodge says has to be an end of material creation, the end of time. Well, here's something that's absolutely fascinating. At that consummate eschatological event, this, quote, end of the world, all of the martyrs of God would be vindicated. He does this absolutely throughout the book, page 64 and 65. And by the way, when you read him, I mean, this concept of the vindication of the martyrs appears over and over and over in the book. So here's what we've got. We have Enoch talking about the consummate end. And the consummate end would be when the souls under the altar crying out for vindication would be vindicated. Does that remind you of any passage? Revelation 6 seems to be drawing on that. In the opening of the fifth seal, John said, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and the testimony which they held. And they cried out, Holy and how long, O Lord, holy and true, do you not avenge us on those who are on the earth? So Enoch presents the martyrs crying out for vindication. Enoch puts that vindication far off. Now remember, he's using the language prosaically and literally. in regard to time. There is this generation, his generation, and then there's the far off, remote generation. But you see in Revelation chapter 6, white robes were given to the martyrs crying out, "How long, O Lord, do you not avenge us?" And they were told to rest for a little while. Not a long time, not to a remote period of time, but soon, a vindication that was coming soon, coming shortly, coming quickly. It was at hand. It was not far off. So effectively, what Mr. Hodge has done by appealing to Enoch is he has said, okay, Enoch has a micro eschatology and a macro. The micro was the near, the macro was far off. Well, okay, let's run with that. The micro was near in Enoch. The macro was far off. But the New Testament writers, speaking of the vindication of the martyrs from Abel onward, said that vindication of all the blood of all the righteous shed upon the earth was coming in Jesus's generation. But wait a minute. According to Enoch, that Mr. Hodge wants to use as proof of a macrocosmic end of the world, Jesus was emphatic in positing that vindication in his generation. So in order for Mr. Hodge's position to have any relevance whatsoever or any probative value, he has to prove that, okay, we have the microcosmic judgment of Genesis and the flood. Oh, but then we have another microcosmic fulfillment in AD 70. But now we're still waiting for the macrocosmic. A threefold fulfillment? Mr. Hodge never indicates that. He says there was the microcosmic of his day, Enoch's day, the macrocosmic end of time. But the fact that Enoch focuses on the vindication of the martyrs, and by the way, he does this throughout as the time of judgment on Old Covenant Israel. Whoa. Now, gotta hurry. Another aspect of the book of Enoch that Mr. Hodge seems to completely ignore. If he's aware of it, he glosses right over it and just does the Passover. And that is this macrocosmic judgment would be at the coming of the Son of Man. The book says this over and over and over again. And you may be going, well, okay, what's the point, Don? How is that fatal? How is that problematic to Mr. Hodge? Well, here's the problem. The coming of the Son of Man was foretold in Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14. By the way, it would be the coming of the Son of Man in vindication of the martyrs. The martyrs created by the little horn of Daniel 7, 10, and 11. So the coming of the Son of Man in Daniel would be for the vindication of the martyrs. Jesus said the coming of the Son of Man in vindication of the martyrs was coming shortly. Luke chapter 18, verses 6 and 8. He used the Greek term entokai, which never, ever, ever means rapidly as opposed to soon. Never. Period. Furthermore, Daniel's vision of the coming of the Son of Man for the vindication of the martyrs is posited in the fourth empire. Babylon, Medo-Persian, Greek, Roman. So, what do we have? We have Mr. Hodge appealing to Enoch for a macrocosmic end of the world judgment. But Enoch posited that climactic, that consummative judgment at the coming of the Son of Man in vindication of the martyrs. Daniel, which is the only Old Testament prophecy of the coming of the Son of Man for the vindication of the martyrs, posited that in the days of the Roman Empire. Folks, we're not waiting for the Roman Empire to be restored. The Roman Empire does not exist. It ceased to exist in 476 BC. Therefore, according to Mr. Hodges' appeal to the book of Enoch, you can't get the coming of the Son of Man for the vindication of the martyrs anywhere past 476 AD and the destruction of the Roman Empire. Mr. Hodge has entrapped himself by his appeal to Enoch. But we're not done here. And boy, there's so much more. I mean, there is so much more. Okay, I said I'd save this to last. I've got to tell an anecdote here. I was in a formal public debate with the Church Christ minister years ago, 91, 92, 90 or 91, somewhere along in there. I'm terrible remembering dates. Anyway, I pointed out that Paul's eschatology, Peter's eschatology, John's eschatology was nothing but what was found in the Old Covenant. God's promises made to Old Covenant Israel. So I called on my opponent to give me one single Old Testament prophecy that predicted the end of the world, the end of time. Well, he ignored me. He ignored the request. Folks, he saw a train coming, pure and simple. Finally, when I pressed him in written form, give me one Old Testament prophecy of the end of the world. And he wrote Enoch. Now, folks, you have to understand, this man does not believe Enoch was an Old Testament prophet. His answer was purely obfuscatory, purely evasive. I got up and I said, ladies and gentlemen, this is more than remarkable. My opponent does not believe the book of Enoch is an Old Testament prophet. And thus Enoch is not an Old Testament prophecy. I called on him to give us an Old Testament prophecy. He refused. Instead, he gives us Enoch. But I said, here's what's even more amazing. It's pretty obvious, it seems to me, I said. My opponent is not familiar with the book of Enoch. Now, why did I say that? He was undoubtedly appealing to Jude 14. He evidently did not know of book or chapter 10 in the book of Enoch on page 38 of R.H. Charles's translation. When their sons have slain one another, and this is the wicked, and they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, until the day of their judgment and of their consummation, until the judgment that is forever and ever is consummated. And in those days they shall be led off to the abyss of fire, and to the torment, and to the prison in which they shall be confined forever. Well, that's description of, quote, the end, the consummative judgment. Wait a minute. When would it happen? The 70th generation from Adam. What was the 70th generation from Adam? It was Jesus's generation. And so I pointed out to my opponent, in your utter desperation, your argumentum ad desperatum, I didn't use that term, I hadn't invented that term yet, you have impaled yourself. Because the very book, which is not an Old Testament prophecy, but which you gave me as an Old Testament prophecy, that very book predicted the coming of the Lord with 10,000 of his saints, which you take to be 2 Peter chapter 3, Enoch predicted it to be in the 70th generation from Adam, which was Jesus's generation. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brian Hodge does not make one single keystroke of mention of how Enoch posits the coming of the Son of Man in the days of Rome. He does not make one single mention of Enoch positing the consummative coming of the Son of Man in the fourth empire as the time of the vindication of the martyrs in the first century, as Jesus said it would be. And Mr. Hodge says not one word about Enoch positing the consummative judgment, the judgment of forever and forever in the 70th generation, which was Jesus's generation. So, in other words, what that means is, even if I wanted to admit that the flood was a microcosmic judgment, now, I don't have a problem saying it was a type. That's not what he seems to be saying. But point of fact is, even if we grant that the flood was microcosmic, pointing to the macrocosmic, and appealing to appealing to Enoch to do that, Enoch is more than clear. It would be in the first century generation. And basically, that falsifies every single thing in Mr. Brian Hodge's book. Out of time. Be sure to join Mike Sullivan and me tonight on Preterist Apologetics. I'm out of time. I'll see you tonight.